In April of 1841, Silas Rutledge made an announcement that shocked even the cruelest plantation owners in South Carolina. He declared that his daughter, Catherine, a 28-year-old woman weighing over 260 pounds, would be placed under the complete authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross, not as a nurse, nor as a companion, but as her master in every way that mattered except on paper. The white society of Culleton County was scandalized, yet they had no idea what Rutledge was truly setting in motion, or what Ezekiel Cross would eventually do to Catherine in the months that followed. By November, Catherine's body had transformed in ways no one could explain. 13 men were dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation was reduced to ashes. What truly happened between the enslaved man and the plantation owner's daughter? What did he do to her that terrified everyone who saw it? Before revealing the unsettling truth, subscribe, hit that bell icon, and comment your state below. Now let me take you back to where everything began. Spring in Culleton County arrived with a suffocating heat and humidity so dense it made the air feel solid. The Combe River crawled slowly through the low country, its dark water mirroring the Spanish moss that hung from live oaks like funeral shrouds. Rice paddies stretched for miles, their flooded fields worked by hundreds of enslaved people, trudging through knee-deep water from dawn to dusk. It was a landscape of wealth built upon suffering, prosperity carved from human misery, and all of it justified by men who convinced themselves cruelty was simply the natural order of things. Cypress Grove Plantation covered 800 acres of moderately productive land. Its owner, Silas Rutledge, was not yet part of the county's elite but desperately aspired to be. He owned 58 enslaved people, which made him wealthy by most standards, but still placed him among the lower ranks of the local gentry. The truly powerful families possessed thousands of acres and hundreds of slaves, spent their summers in Charleston, and sent their children to universities in the North. Their names carried the kind of weight that could open doors or ruin reputations with a single word. Silas had married Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, gaining moderate landholdings and a respected name. Elizabeth was practical, meticulous with records, and cared more about profit margins than social climbing. She died in 1813 while giving birth to their only child, Catherine. For 28 years, Silas raised Catherine alone while focusing on forcing his way into the inner circles of county power. Tall and thin from a lifetime of obsession, his prematurely gray hair gave him a severe appearance that matched his cold temperament. In business, he was known for being shrewd but dependable, the kind of man who drove hard bargains but kept his word. Catherine, raised in isolation with private tutors, never truly fit anywhere. By 1841, she was 28 years old and weighed nearly 260 pounds. Years of medications prescribed by doctors diagnosing her with hysteria and female nervous disorders had swollen her body. She suffered violent fits, screamed, threw objects, and had once attacked her father with a letter opener, leaving a scar on his left hand. White society whispered false sympathy. Poor Silas Rutledge, burdened with a mad daughter. What a shame, she was such a pretty child. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew what Catherine had witnessed at 12 years old. Her madness was not madness at all. It was the only rational reaction to living with monsters. The letter arrived on April 7th, delivered by private courier. Silas opened it in his study, expecting business correspondence. Instead, he found 3 pages on expensive paper, sealed with red wax bearing a symbol he recognized immediately. A scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the Brethren of the Harvest. The Brethren were 13 men who gathered in darkness to perform rituals they believed strengthened the land through blood sacrifice. Their beliefs mixed old European traditions with spiritual practices taken from the enslaved people they exploited. They believed the strong were meant to consume the weak, literally when necessary. Silas had been initiated in 1822, and over 19 years had attended around 40 gatherings, participating in rituals that ranged from disturbing to monstrous. The letter informed him that he owed $12,000 borrowed through years of gambling losses and failed investments, and no impossible sum to repay. Selling most of his land and all of his slaves would destroy everything he had built. But the Brethren offered an alternative, a demonstration of loyalty for members in difficult positions. Silas was to place his daughter Catherine under the full authority of one of his enslaved men. not temporarily, not as punishment, but as a genuine transfer of power lasting a full year. The enslaved man would control her daily life and treatment. Silas was to announce this publicly at a gathering of prominent county families, framing it as an extreme medical treatment. The humiliation would be absolute. In a society that claimed to protect white women above all else, he would be declaring his daughter worth less than property. But if he agreed, his debt would be erased, and the brethren would provide financial support to restore his status. Silas sat in his study for hours that night, considering his options. Bankruptcy would destroy him, and the brethren, with their influence over judges, lawyers, and politicians, could make him disappear if he became troublesome. The other choice was to sacrifice his daughter's dignity to preserve his position, exactly the kind of decision society had trained him to make. Property over people, power over morality. He wrote his acceptance by candlelight and sent it before dawn. 3 days later, another letter arrived with a name and brief history. Ezekiel Cross, age 33, purchased through an intermediary from a Virginia plantation. His listed skills included carpentry and herbal medicine. Temperament described as quiet and obedient. What the letter didn't mention was that Ezekiel Cross had been chosen specifically for this purpose. His placement at Cypress Grove was no coincidence. He carried his own burning hunger for justice and the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Ezekiel arrived on April 13th in a wagon driven by a trader named Henderson. Unusually, the wagon pulled directly to the main house rather than the barns where most slave transactions occurred. Silas stepped out onto the porch, shielding his eyes from the morning sun. In the wagon bed sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noticed was his eyes. Most enslaved people kept their gaze lowered as a means of survival, but Ezekiel looked directly at him, calm, steady, assessing. It unsettled Silas. Ezekiel was tall, around 6'2", with broad shoulders and lean muscle built through years of labor. His skin was free of whipping scars, his clothing plain but clean, his hands large and calloused yet precise, revealing skill beyond brute strength. Henderson climbed down and handed Silas the papers. Ezekiel Cross, as requested. Previous owner said he was quiet but capable. Your associates want you to know this one was carefully selected. Silas barely glanced at the documents. He looked straight at Ezekiel. You understand why you are here? He asked. Yes, sir, Ezekiel replied, his deep Virginia-tinged voice measured. My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her care. Doctors have failed. You claim knowledge of herbal treatments. My grandmother was a healer, sir. She taught me before I was sold, Ezekiel answered. The transaction concluded swiftly. Ezekiel was shown to a small cabin near the main house, separated from the other slave quarters. He received basic supplies and was told his duties would begin the next day. His sole responsibility was Catherine's care, and failure would bring severe consequences. Ezekiel nodded and said, Yes, sir, when required. When finally alone, his expression shifted. His jaw loosened, his shoulders eased. He sat on the bed and pulled a small cloth bundle from inside his shirt. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a piece of worn paper with 3 names written in a child's uncertain hand. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his wife, son, and daughter. They had been sold away from him 3 years earlier to a brutal plantation in Alabama, known for working enslaved people to death. Within 18 months, they were all gone. Sarah from fever, Benjamin from an untreated injury that turned septic, and little Ruth from starvation after she simply stopped eating. She had been 6 years old, too young to understand why her family had been ripped apart. Silas Rutledge had been the one to sell them, not out of financial desperation, not because of wrongdoing, but to prove to the brethren that he could make hard choices without mercy. He had split a family like kindling for burning. Ezekiel had spent 2 years moving southward on purpose, arranging to be sold from one plantation to the next, while quietly collecting pieces of knowledge. He picked up whispers of the brethren, and learned their rights and the names of men who thought themselves above consequence. When the chance came to be sent specifically to Rutledge's estate, Ezekiel recognized it for what it was, a rare opening. He would gain access to Rutled's house, its secrets, and the weak points of a man who trusted appearances more than truth. Sometimes justice did not come from courts or laws, but from patient planning and the willingness to become as monstrous as the moment demanded. He folded the scrap with the 3 names and set it aside, then lay staring at the ceiling as he began to map the steps ahead. His duties began on April 14th. Judith, a middle-aged house slave whose hair had already begun to silver, led him up to Catherine's room on the 2nd floor. She knocked, hesitation audible in the soft rap. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone to help with your treatments." A crash answered her, something heavy against plaster. Catherine's voice rang out, thick with venom. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith looked at Ezekiel with pity. "She is having a bad day," she murmured. Ezekiel opened the door and closed it behind him before Judith could follow. The chamber was large but dim, curtains drawn tight. The air stale, redolent of unwashed linens and something metallic, the sweet rot of mercury. Books lay scattered on the floor. A picture frame lay shattered against the wall, clothing strewn in disordered piles. Catherine sat by the cold hearth in a stained dressing gown, her dark hair loose and tangled, her face swollen, her eyes unfocused. Her hands trembled on the arms of the chair. She regarded Ezekiel with a shifting expression, confusion, then fear, then a brittle anger. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I said no more doctors." "I am not a doctor, miss," he replied. "My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help," she scoffed, a hard, bitter sound. "That is what they all say. Help, treatment, medicine. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She lurched, swayed. "I know what this is. He is punishing me for remembering, for speaking, for refusing to forget." Ezekiel remained calm, deliberately unthreatening. "What are you supposed to forget?" he asked. The question disarmed her for a heartbeat. Anger softened into something brittlely vulnerable. "You do not know," she spat. "I know nothing, miss. Only that your father says you are unwell." He watched her study him as if seeing him truly for the first time. "You are not from here," she observed. "Virginia originally, miss," he answered. "Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Catherine's voice trembled with a mix of dread and accusation. Ezekiel's pulse quickened, but his face betrayed nothing. "I do not know what you mean," he said. "Liar," she hissed. "No heat in it, just exhaustion. Everyone lies. It is easier than truth." She sank back into the chair. "Leave me alone. Tell my father his newest torment failed." Ezekiel moved to the window and threw the curtains open. Sunlight rushed into the room. Catherine cried out and covered her eyes. "When did you last go outside, miss?" he asked gently. "I cannot walk that far." "I'm too weak," she said. "When did you last eat without laudanum?" He pressed. "The medicine is necessary. Doctors say so. What if the doctors are wrong?" he proposed, turning from the light. That was the first card he played. "What if everything you've been told about your condition is meant not to heal you, but to keep you controllable? What if your father has been dosing you for years to ensure you never become well enough to speak of what you saw?" For a long moment, Catherine was still. Her tremors halted. Her hands stilled. Her mind seemed to sharpen, the fog lifting enough for a sliver of clarity. When she finally spoke, her voice was clearer, different from the slurred tones that had defined her for years. "He told you," she said. "No, miss," Ezekiel replied. "Your father told me nothing, but I have eyes. I know mercury poisoning. I know prolonged laudanum use. Healthy women do not become like this without someone working hard to make them so." "Why would you say this?" Suspicion returned like a cold wind. "This is a trick. You are testing me." "I tell you because I can help you become truly well, clear-minded, strong enough to leave this room," he said. "But it will be hard. Your body is dependent on those medicines. Stopping will be painful. You will feel worse before you feel better, and your father will not approve. Then why would you do it?" she demanded. Ezekiel met her gaze. "Because I have my reasons for wanting Silas Rutledge to suffer," he said quietly. "And the best way to make him suffer is to return to him a daughter who remembers and is able to speak the truth." The plainness of his words was dangerous. Catherine looked at him, the mix of hope and terror clear in her eyes. "What did he do to you?" she asked in a whisper. He sold my family, my wife, my son, my daughter, Ezekiel answered. Taken 3 years ago to a plantation in Alabama known for work to death. They were gone within 18 months. Fever, an untreated wound, and a child who simply stopped eating because she no longer understood why she had been torn from home. His mouth hardened. Silas Rutledge sold them, not out of necessity but to prove something to the brethren. Catherine absorbed this, the pieces of her past and his fitting together in her mind. The brethren, she repeated. You do not know them yet. She laughed then, a sound edged with mania. You will learn. Everyone learns. Her manner shifted. She leaned forward, eyes alight. If I agree, if I let you help me, what happens then? You get well, miss, Ezekiel said. When you are, we decide what comes next. I must plan my revenge. You will have yours. Perhaps they align. Catherine studied him a long time before she spoke. I want them all dead. My father, Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw, every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first, to know it's coming, and then to die. The venom in her words surprised Ezekiel, not for its intensity, but because it came from someone so readily dismissed as mad. This was not madness, he thought. It was suppressed rage concentrated into something lethal. Ezekiel inclined his head. Then we are conspirators of a sort. Use my name carefully, he cautioned. I cannot, not where anyone might hear, she replied. We must be careful. Know this, Ezekiel, she said, eyes flashing dangerously. I have killed before. Her voice dropped. The story she told was fragmentary. House slaves who might have exposed her lucid moments disappeared. Families were given the excuse that their loved ones had run away. She smiled, but the smile was terrible and thin. The laudanum blurs everything, but I remember enough. So if you plan to betray me, to use me, then dispose of me. Know that I am not a victim. I am something worse. A chill ran through Ezekiel. He had expected an accomplice, not someone whose appetite for violence might outstrip his own. He kept his face steady. I believe you, miss. I will not betray you. Good, she said, rising with more steadiness than he anticipated. Then let us begin. But I have a condition. When this is over, when we have had our revenge, I want to die. I do not wish to live with what I have seen and done. You will help me with that too. Ezekiel had not anticipated that, but his resolve was set. Agreed, he answered. They sealed the pact with a hesitant handshake, her grip stronger than it first appeared. Over the next week, Ezekiel began the work of treatment. He tapered her laudanum gradually, substituting herbal tinctures, valerian root to calm anxiety and aid sleep, chamomile for digestion, milk thistle to support the liver as toxins were purged. Withdrawal was brutal. Catherine spent 3 harrowing days in fever, shaking and vomiting. Ezekiel stayed at her bedside holding basins, cooling cloths against her forehead, speaking softly so she would know she was not utterly alone. When the worst passed, she emerged weaker in body but clearer in mind. The tremors lessened, her speech steadied, and she could focus on reading again. Then the harder work began, walking short distances at first from her room to the hallway and back, each step exhausting but necessary. He overhauled her diet, lean meats and vegetables in place of pastries, and imposed strict portions, a battle against years of using food for comfort. As her body healed, their conversations deepened. Catherine recounted the cellar, every detail that turned Ezekiel's stomach, while he listened without interruption. She spoke of years of gaslighting, her father's steady insistence that she was mad and that her memories were false. She told him of a hidden journal, pages filled with dates and names documenting late-night departures, visitors at strange hours, and sounds from below that should not have been possible. Ezekiel, in turn, told his own story, of Sarah who sang while she worked and taught their children to read in secret, of Benjamin, a boy whose skill with numbers had amazed overseers, of Ruth who loved flowers and made their cabin beautiful, until Silas Rutledge came with a buyer's warrant. Ezekiel remembered the day as if it had been branded into his mind, how Silas Rutledge had inspected them like livestock, handling his wife's arms, tilting the children's faces, calculating their worth as though they were tools, how he had agreed to purchase all 3 for what he called a fair price, only to change the terms at the last moment, saying he needed only the woman and children. not Ezekiel. How he had deliberately split their family, not for necessity or profit, but because he could. Ezekiel would never forget the smile on Silas's face as he did it. "That is what I remember most," Ezekiel said quietly. "My son crying, holding my leg, begging. My wife trying to be strong, telling Benjamin to be brave. Your father smiled as if it pleased him to cause that pain." Catherine listened, her eyes clear for once, her mind unclouded. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I know sorry is just a word, but I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not responsible for what he does." "Miss," Ezekiel replied. "No," she said, voice firm, "but I am responsible for what I do next. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for what he took from you. They will all pay." The formal announcement was scheduled for April 29th. 41 people gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room for what the invitations called an important family occasion. The county's elite arrived in their polished carriages. Judge Pelham with his wife Eleanor, Reverend Crenshaw and his daughter, Marcus Fanning with his family, Benjamin Lyle from the bank, and others. The dining table was laid with extravagance. Oysters, roasted duck, multiple rice dishes, sweet potatoes, fresh loaves of bread, and a towering cake for dessert. Catherine sat at her father's right hand, speaking only when spoken to, answering politely but offering nothing. Ezekiel moved through the room silently with the other house servants, pouring wine, clearing plates, and listening. He caught every word, watched each gesture, storing away information like a weapon. After dessert, Silas stood and tapped his glass. "My friends, thank you for joining us," he began. "As you know, Catherine has been unwell for years. We tried every treatment. Doctors from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing helped until recently." He gestured toward Ezekiel. 2 weeks ago, I brought in Ezekiel, who has knowledge of herbal medicine. As you can see, Catherine is much improved, clearer, calmer, more herself than she has been in years. There was a polite murmur around the table. Catherine kept her face composed, but beneath the linen, Ezekiel saw the strain in her hands clutching her napkin. "This improvement," Silas continued smoothly, "has led to a difficult decision. Catherine requires ongoing care more intensive than our household can easily provide. After much consideration, I have decided Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare. He will have complete authority over her treatment, daily activities, and living arrangements, effective immediately." The polite murmur turned uneasy. Glances were exchanged. Mrs. Pelham's face stiffened with shock. Marcus Fanning cleared his throat. "Silas, I do not understand." "You are placing your daughter under a slave's care permanently?" "I am placing her with someone who succeeded where others failed," Silas replied. "My daughter's health is more important than social convention." "But surely," Reverend Crenshaw said carefully, "there are other options. Companion, a nurse, someone more appropriate." Silas's face hardened. "I have made my decision." Catherine agrees. "Do you not, daughter?" All eyes turned to Catherine. She could have refused. She could have told the truth and watched the house crumble around them. Instead, she smiled. A small, careful smile, perfectly measured. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind and his treatments help. I am content with this arrangement. It was flawless. But Ezekiel saw what others didn't. The bloodless grip on the napkin, the sharp gleam behind her calm exterior. She was playing her part as the dutiful daughter, while beneath the surface she seethed. The rest of the evening was thick with uneasy conversation. Some guests left earlier than planned. Others lingered to speak privately with Silas, voices low, their concern poorly concealed. Ezekiel caught fragments near the study. "Are you certain this is wise? What will people say?" And from Judge Pelham, pitched low, "The brethren will not approve of this becoming public." Silas's answer was too quiet to hear, but Pelham nodded after it and clapped him on the shoulder. By midnight, the carriages were gone, the house quiet again. Catherine retired to her room. Silas disappeared into his study, and Ezekiel helped the others clear away the last of the dishes before climbing the stairs. He knocked softly. "Come in," she said. She was still in her dinner dress, sitting at the window, looking into the dark night. "It is done," she said without turning. "I am officially your responsibility. Property of property, How absurd. How are you feeling, miss? Ezekiel asked. I want to burn this house down with everyone in it, she said. But we must be patient. Isn't that what you tell me? Yes, miss. I agreed because I want them to feel secure. I want them to think this is just my father's eccentricity. I want them to forget about me while we work. She turned to him then. Did you see their faces? The disgust, the pity. They think I'm pathetic. They have no idea what we're planning. And what exactly are we planning, miss? He asked. Catherine went to her dresser and lifted a wooden box. Inside were stacks of paper covered in her neat coded handwriting. I've been documenting everything I remember for years. Dates, names, rituals. All written in a code no one but me can read. We have enough to destroy 20 men. And will anyone believe us, miss? A woman newly recovered from madness and a slave? No, she said, her voice hardening. Which is why we need proof they cannot dismiss. Real physical evidence. She pulled one page from the stack. I know where they keep their records. The Brethren maintains a ledger. Every ritual, every sacrifice, every name. They keep it to ensure everyone is guilty together. My father mentioned it years ago before he realized I would remember. Where is this ledger? In the cellar. There's a hidden room beyond the main chamber. I've never been inside, but I heard them speak of it. That's where they keep everything they can't afford to lose. Ezekiel felt the cold thrill of dangerous opportunity. A ledger like that could tear everything open, but it meant going into the heart of their darkness. When can we reach it? My father travels to Charleston monthly, Catherine said. The next trip is May 14th. He'll be gone 3 days. That gives us 2 weeks to prepare. We need the cellar layout, every room, every hiding place. I can help, she added. I've been thinking about this for 16 years. For an hour, they whispered over plans. Catherine sketched what she remembered of the cellar. Ezekiel questioned her about guards, keys, patrols. When he finally returned to his small room, the night was deep and still. He sat by the candle, staring at the scrap of paper with his family's names. I'm doing this for you, he whispered to Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. For every soul broken by men like Silas Rutledge. He blew out the flame and lay in darkness. Somewhere beneath his feet lay a cellar he had never seen, holding secrets that could shatter South Carolina's most powerful families. In 2 weeks, he would go down there to find them. The days that followed passed deceptively calm. Catherine grew stronger. Her weight dropped. Her mind remained sharp, and she walked farther each day. More importantly, she began translating the coded journals, revealing pieces of the Brethren's world that made Ezekiel's blood run cold. The Brethren was not confined to Colleton County. It was part of a broader network that stretched through Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond, different names in different places, but always the same structure. Wealthy men who claimed their power came from ancient rituals of dominance and sacrifice. They think they're preserving some old mystery, Catherine explained one afternoon. European cult practices mixed with things they stole from enslaved people. They turned it into something monstrous, a justification for what can never be justified. The sacrifices were not always human, sometimes animals, but often they took people who would not be missed. Slaves with no families, poor whites who wandered onto their land. Once, Catherine said, I heard my father mention a child. I don't know if it was literal. Where do the bodies go? Ezekiel asked. Swamps, she said flatly. Every plantation has one. Bodies go in and are never found. Alligators do the rest. And this ledger documents all of it. Every ritual for 40 years. Names, dates, and descriptions. They keep it because they need mutual complicity. Each man bound to the others by shared guilt, so none can expose anyone without destroying themselves. May 14th arrived. Silas left for Charleston early in the morning, taking his carriage and manservant. He would stay with associates, attend to business, and return the evening of May 16th. That gave them almost 3 full days. They waited until nightfall to move. The house settled into its evening rhythm, quieting after 10. Meeting in Catherine's room, she wore simple dark clothing that allowed freedom of movement. Her hair pulled back tightly, her face set with resolve. When Ezekiel asked if she was certain, she answered without hesitation, I have never been more certain. Just go. The cellar entrance hid behind the pantry wall, disguised as paneling. A subtle press and the hidden door clicked open, revealing steep, narrow stairs. The stench struck them immediately. Damp earth, smoke, and something rotten. Catherine caught his reaction. You get used to it, she said softly. I wish I could say the smell fades, but it doesn't. Ezekiel carried a shuttered lantern, casting a dim glow as the wooden steps creaked underfoot. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a broad, low-ceilinged room with thick beams and walls that wept moisture. Packed earth covered the floor. At its center stood the altar. Plain wood now, but the dark stains and carved grooves told their story. Candle holders, wax-sealed jars, wooden boxes, and a rack of black robes trimmed with crimson surrounded it. One wall held shelves stacked with papers and books. Catherine moved like someone following a mental map, leading Ezekiel to a section of stone. She pressed a specific block. A hidden panel clicked and swung inward, revealing a smaller chamber. Inside, the brethren kept their secrets. The ledger rested on a stand in the center, massive, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. Smaller journals and shelves of glass jars lined the walls. Catherine pointed. That is what we need. Ezekiel approached, opening the ledger carefully. Heavy parchment filled with meticulous handwriting. Names, dates, and ritual descriptions written like clinical notes, rather than crimes. With each entry, his horror deepened. These men had not committed isolated acts. They had built a system. Every 6 weeks they gathered, aligning their rituals with agricultural cycles, believing blood fed the land. At least 37 victims over decades, mostly enslaved people, but also poor whites, indigenous people, anyone who would not be missed. And worse, notes describing the consumption of victims, ritualistic meals intended to transfer power. Ezekiel whispered, "Dear God." Catherine's voice was steady. I tried to tell you. I watched them when I was 12. I watched them cut pieces from that woman. I watched my father drink from a goblet. Then they spent 16 years telling me I imagined it. Ezekiel turned to October 1838 and found 3 lines. Purchased family unit from Virginia. Woman Sarah. Children Benjamin and Ruth. Separated from male to demonstrate resolve. Sent to Alabama contact. Payment received. That was all his family's destruction was worth. His hands clenched. We need to take this. Catherine caught his arm. No, if we take it, they'll know immediately. We copy the key entries first. Rage burned in him, but she was right. Revenge required patience. For 3 hours they worked. Catherine copied the names of current members and detailed rituals. Ezekiel documented victims, building a list to be cross-referenced with outside records. It was brutal work. His hands shook, and once Catherine fled the room to breathe, haunted by memories. But slowly, methodically, they built their case. Neither of them heard the footsteps above. Their first warning was the sudden flare of bright lantern light. Ezekiel's blood ran cold. Silas stood in the doorway with 2 men beside him, and more behind. I must admit, Silas said calmly, I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd find the inner chamber. Catherine rose slowly, stepping between her father and Ezekiel. You were supposed to be in Charleston. I was supposed to be, Silas replied. But I never trusted your miraculous recovery. I left this morning, yes, but returned this afternoon and watched the house. Did you really think I wouldn't prepare for this? You poisoned me for 16 years, she said evenly, and expected me to accept it. It was necessary, Silas answered. You saw something a child shouldn't have. I couldn't let you destroy everything. I was 12. I watched you murder a woman and eat her flesh. That was not fear. That was witnessing evil. Evil? Silas tilted his head. Such a simple word. His gaze shifted to Ezekiel. And you, using my daughter to get to me. Ezekiel calculated the odds. 7 men against 2, and Catherine couldn't fight. It looked hopeless. Silas read his thoughts. Don't do anything foolish. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't allow this rebellion to continue. He signaled the men. Bring them upstairs. They were locked in Silas's study, a windowless room with a single transom too high to reach. Catherine checked him. Are you hurt? No, miss. But we are in serious trouble. Yes, she said, pulling something from inside her dress. The copied papers. He didn't search me. Too confident. That won't help if we're dead, Ezekiel said. We're not going to die. Not tonight. He still wants me alive. That's leverage. Outside, they heard men gathering. The brethren was assembling. After an hour, Marcus Fanning appeared at the door. They are ready for you. Come peacefully and you will not be harmed. Back in the cellar, the room was transformed. 13 Brethren members in ritual robes filled the chamber. Candles flickered. Crimson cloth draped the altar. 13 chairs formed a perfect circle, one empty at the head where Silas now stood. Catherine and Ezekiel were forced into the center, surrounded. Silas lifted his hood, speaking to the gathered men. Brothers of the harvest, thank you for coming on short notice. We face a crisis. My daughter and her associate found the inner chamber. They saw the ledger. They were copying entries when I caught them. Judge Pelam rose. Then they must be silenced permanently. This is not complicated. Silas raised his hand. I disagree. My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options. And the man represents an opportunity. What opportunity? Reverend Crenshaw asked. To test something I have long believed. That a person can be drawn into our work through their own actions if framed correctly. Silas turned to Ezekiel. You want revenge on me. You want to destroy me for what I did to your family. I understand that. But what if I offered you a different kind of revenge? A more meaningful one? I do not understand, Ezekiel said carefully. I am offering you membership, not as an equal. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members, but as an associate. You would attend our gatherings, participate in rituals, and in exchange, I would give you what you want most. My family is dead. You cannot give me what I want. No, but I can give you revenge against the people who killed them. The plantation owner in Alabama, who worked your wife and children to death. His name is Edward Gaines. He is not part of the Brethren. He has no protection from us. If you join us, prove your loyalty. I will give you resources to destroy him. Money, information, whatever you need to make him suffer as you have suffered. The offer hung in the air, obscene in its calculation. Join the men who destroyed his family to get revenge on another monster. And if I refuse, then you and Catherine both die tonight. Your bodies go into the swamp. No one will ever know what happened. The papers Catherine was copying will be burned. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues as it always has. Silas spread his hands. But if you accept, you live. Catherine lives. You get your revenge. All it costs is your soul. Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the slightest shake of her head. Do not do it. Whatever happens, do not become them. But Ezekiel was already thinking about accepting, about getting inside their organization, gathering more evidence, buying time. He looked back at Silas and Catherine. What happens to her? She returns to her room, resumes her medications, forgets what she has seen. The alternative, Silas continued, is she dies alongside you? No. Catherine's voice cut across the chamber. I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Kill me if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are. Silas's expression hardened. Then you have made your choice. Wait, Ezekiel spoke quickly. I accept. But on one condition, Catherine goes free. Not back to her room, free. Let her leave this house. Leave South Carolina. Give her money to start over. If you do that, I will join you. Several Brethren members shook their heads, but Judge Pelam spoke. The boy makes a point. The girl is already broken. Even if she spoke, who would believe her? But a man willing to join us, to be complicit, that is valuable. That proves our power extends even to those who hate us. Silas considered. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have associates in Philadelphia who will take her in. She will be given a new identity and a stipend to live on. But she can never return to South Carolina. Never contact anyone from her old life. She will be dead to everyone here. Agreed. Catherine stared at Ezekiel. No, I will not leave you to... Agreed, Ezekiel interrupted. She goes free. I join you. Then we have a bargain. Silas turned to the others. Catherine leaves tomorrow. Ezekiel's initiation will be in 3 weeks at the next regular gathering. Until then, he remains at Cypress Grove under watch. If he tries to escape or contact anyone, the deal is void and both die. Understood? Ezekiel nodded. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but he caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Trust me. Catherine left the next morning. A closed carriage took her away at dawn. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window as it rolled down the long drive and disappeared into the trees. She had not been allowed to say goodbye. He had not been allowed to speak with her after the confrontation in the cellar. But as she had been escorted to her room the previous night, she had looked back at him once, and in her eyes he had seen something that gave him hope. She understood. She knew he had not truly surrendered. She knew this was strategy, not defeat. The question was whether she would actually go to Philadelphia or whether she had her own plans. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Ezekiel's life. He was kept under constant watch. 2 overseers followed him everywhere. He was not allowed to leave the plantation grounds. He was given menial work to keep him occupied, meaningless tasks that accomplished nothing but filled time. But he was also given access to the main house, to the study where Silas kept his papers, to the cellar where the next gathering would take place. They were watching him, yes, but they were also testing him, seeing if he would try to escape, seeing if he would attempt sabotage. Ezekiel did neither. He played the role of a defeated man who had made a pragmatic choice for survival. He was quiet, obedient, asked no questions, caused no problems, but he was observing everything. He was learning the routines of the house, noting which slaves could be trusted, which overseers were cruel, which brethren members visited regularly. He was building a mental map of how everything worked, looking for weaknesses. And at night, alone in his cabin, he thought about what was coming. His initiation would require participation in their rituals. They would test him. They would want to make him complicit in something horrible, so he could never expose them without destroying himself. He thought about how far he was willing to go, what lines he would not cross, even for revenge. Whether there was any act so terrible that justice did not justify it. He did not have good answers to those questions. On June 2nd, the night before his initiation, Silas came to his cabin. It was late after midnight. Ezekiel woke to knocking and opened the door to find his owner standing there alone. "May I come in?" Ezekiel stepped aside. Silas entered and looked around the sparse room. Finally he spoke. "Tomorrow you will become one of us. Not fully, never fully, but enough. I want you to understand what that means. I understand what I agreed to. Do you? Do you truly?" Silas sat on the single chair uninvited. "The Brethren has existed for 43 years. In that time we have never lost a member to exposure. Never had someone break our code of silence. Do you know why? Because everyone is equally guilty," Ezekiel said, "partly. But also because we take care of each other. A man joins the Brethren and suddenly doors open. Business opportunities appear. Legal problems disappear. Enemies find themselves in difficulty. We are not just a society, Ezekiel. We are a network of power that extends across the entire South. Once you are part of that network, even as an associate, you will have access to resources you cannot imagine. And in exchange, I help you murder people." Silas did not flinch. "In exchange, you help us maintain the natural order. The strong over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. That is how the world has always worked. We simply acknowledge it and use it to our advantage. You killed my family to demonstrate your commitment to that order. I did, and I would do it again, because sentiment is weakness. Love is weakness. The moment you allow yourself to care more about individuals than about power, you have already lost." Silas leaned forward. "But here is what I want you to understand. Your family is dead. Nothing you do will change that. But you can ensure their deaths meant something. You can use the power the Brethren offers to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. You can work from inside our organization to make changes, to push for less brutal treatment of slaves, to advocate for better conditions. You will have a voice at our table that is worth something." It was almost convincing, almost. The idea that Ezekiel could become some kind of reformer from within, using his position to help others. But he knew it was a trap, a rationalization. The moment he participated in their rituals, he would be compromised. The moment he accepted their power, he would be corrupted by it. "Why are you telling me this?" Ezekiel asked. "Because I want you to succeed. Because having you as an ally is more valuable than having you as an enemy. Because I killed your family, but I do not want to kill you." Silas stood. "Tomorrow night you will be asked to do something difficult. Something that will test whether you truly commit to this path. I am telling you now, whatever you are asked to do it. Do not hesitate. Do not show weakness. Because if you fail the test, both you and Catherine die. Yes, I know she is not really in Philadelphia. I know she is hiding somewhere, planning her own revenge. But I have people watching for her. The moment she surfaces, if you have not proven yourself, she will be found and killed. Do you understand? Ice flooded through Ezekiel. Catherine was alive, but she was in danger, and his actions tomorrow would determine whether she lived or died. I understand, he said quietly. Silas nodded and left without another word. Ezekiel sat alone in the dark cabin, the silence pressing against him like a weight. He thought about the impossible position he was trapped in. Tomorrow he would have to participate in something monstrous. He would have to stand beside monsters, prove himself to them, become complicit in their evil, or he had to find another way. A third option, one they would never see coming. He pulled out the worn piece of paper with his family's names written across it, letting the moonlight through the window fall upon it. "Forgive me," he whispered softly, his voice trembling, "for what I'm about to do, for what I have to become. I promise you it will not be for nothing." The gathering began at midnight on June 3rd. 2 Brethren members brought Ezekiel to the cellar, stripped him to the waist, and tied his hands behind his back. They led him down into the candlelit chamber where 13 figures waited, their faces hidden by robes. Silas stood at the head of the altar. "Brothers of the harvest," Silas declared, "tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any other. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to hate us, a man who has lost everything because of what we are. We do this to prove our power reaches even to our enemies, that anyone can be brought into the fold if the price is right." 2 more brethren dragged forward a figure bound and gagged. She struggled weakly as they placed her on the altar. A young woman, maybe 18 or 19, enslaved and terrified, her eyes wide with panic. "This is your test, Ezekiel," Silas said. "To join us, you must participate in our ritual. Take the knife. Make the first cut. Prove that your desire for revenge against Gaines is stronger than your moral objections. Refuse, and you die here tonight. Accept, and we will help you destroy the man who murdered your family." Low chanting began to ripple through the room, rhythmic and strange, in a language Ezekiel didn't know. The candles flickered as shadows danced across the stone walls. Silas held out the knife, its long blade gleaming, the leather handle rough against his palm. "Take it. Make the choice." Ezekiel stared at the woman on the altar. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to scream through the gag. Her eyes locked on his, and in that gaze he saw every enslaved soul brutalized by men like these. He saw Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. He looked at the knife, Silas, at the 13 watching him, waiting to witness the moment he either broke or became one of them. But there was another path, the one he had prepared for 3 long weeks. He took the knife. Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. Silas smiled, convinced the trap had sprung. The chanting grew louder. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar. The woman's eyes filled with terror. He raised the knife, then turned fast and hard and drove the blade into the throat of the nearest Brethren member. Blood sprayed into the candlelight. The man crumpled. Ezekiel ripped the robe off the dying man and hurled it over the candles, plunging half the room into darkness. Shouts erupted. Panic spread like wildfire. Ezekiel moved through the confusion like a storm. Rage, sharpened over years, exploded into action. He grabbed another man, used him as a shield against a wild swing, hurled the body into 2 more, kicked out, hurt a knee crack, and smashed a candle holder into another face. The Brethren were powerful men, but not fighters. They lived cushioned by privilege, not forged in suffering. Ezekiel was forged. He carved his way to the altar, freed the young woman with a quick slash. "Run!" He roared toward the stairs. She bolted from the room. Ezekiel turned back. 7 of them still stood between him and freedom. "You've made a terrible mistake," Silas said, voice steady even as blood pooled around his feet. "You've killed yourself. And Catherine." "Maybe," Ezekiel answered, "but I'll take as many of you with me as I can." What Ezekiel didn't know was that upstairs, Catherine had already returned. She had never gone to Philadelphia. She'd been hiding in the slave quarters, watching, waiting, planning. For 3 weeks she'd moved in the shadows, speaking to the people she'd grown up beside, those who had lived under her father's cruelty, those who had lost everything to the Brethren's rituals. She'd told them what was beneath the house. She'd told them tonight was the night. 23 came. Men and women with nothing left to lose. Parents who had buried their children because of these men. People who had lived as property, who had survived under whips and chains. They carried axes, scythes, hammers. They carried generations of rage. When the young woman burst screaming from the cellar, Catherine led them down. The brethren, focused on Ezekiel, didn't hear the thunder until it was on top of them. The enslaved people flooded the cellar like a wave. There was no mercy, no pause. Pelham tried to draw a pistol. An axe split his arm. Reverend Crenshaw begged for forgiveness and got none. Marcus Fanning tried to run and was dragged down the stairs screaming. Silas, watching his world collapse, seized Catherine with a knife to her throat. "Stop," he shouted. "Stop or I kill her." The room went still. Catherine stared at him, eyes like stone. "Do it, kill me. It changes nothing. You've already lost. I can still escape. You can still nothing." Her voice was a blade. "You spent 16 years trying to break me, to make me forget, to convince me I was mad. But I remembered everything. And now I'm going to watch you die." She slammed her elbow back into his ribs. He stumbled. She twisted free. Before he could recover, Ezekiel was in front of him. They faced each other, master and slave, oppressor and the man who'd lost everything. All the power, the cruelty, the smug belief in invincibility that had defined Silas's life meant nothing now. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said, his voice low. "My wife, my children, my life. You did it because you could, because cruelty was easier than seeing us as human." "Please," Silas whispered. "Did my wife say please? My son? Any of the people you slaughtered down here?" Ezekiel shook his head. "No mercy. Not for you. Not ever." What followed was brutal, final. 13 men who thought themselves gods bled like anyone else. The people they had crushed for decades made certain none of them left the cellar alive. Power was a lie, and cruelty had finally come home. When it ended, Catherine stood in the center of the room, surrounded by bodies, trembling, not from fear but release. 16 years of buried rage poured out in silence. Ezekiel approached. "Are you hurt?" "No. Are you?" "Minor cuts. Nothing serious." They looked around at the ruin of what had once been untouchable. "What do we do now?" he asked. Catherine's smile was grim, steady. "Now we burn it all, the cellar, the ledger, the evidence, everything. We destroy every trace of what happened here. But that evidence could prove what they did. It could bring justice." "Justice?" Catherine laughed bitterly. Ezekiel glanced around the room. "This is justice, the only kind we were ever going to get. If we try to take that ledger to the authorities, what happens? We're hunted down and killed. The brethren who remain in other counties will come for us. This only ends if everyone believes the Cypress Grove chapter died in an accident. No evidence, no witnesses, no story to tell." She was right, and Ezekiel knew it. "Then we burn it." For the next 2 hours they prepared. The enslaved people who had fought alongside them vanished into the night before dawn, scattering back to their plantations. They would say nothing. They had seen nothing. That was how survival worked. Catherine and Ezekiel drenched the cellar in oil, built piles of wood and kindling, and arranged the bodies to make it look like a tragic accident. Then they placed the ledger and the journals in the center of the altar. "Wait," Ezekiel said softly. He opened the ledger and found the entries with his family's names. Tearing out the pages carefully, he folded them and tucked them inside his shirt. "For them, so they're not forgotten." Catherine nodded, then held a candle to the soaked wood. The flames caught quickly, racing through the room. Within minutes, the cellar burned. They climbed the stairs, stepping outside to watch Cypress Grove Plantation consumed by fire. People would see the smoke. There would be questions. But they already had their story. A candle knocked over in the cellar, trapping the master and his guests. A tragedy no one would question. As the sun rose behind the ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. "What will you do now?" "Go north," he said. "Use the chaos to disappear. Find others. Build something to help people escape." He touched the folded paper in his shirt. "I can't bring them back, but I can make sure no one else suffers like they did." "I'll go north too," Catherine said. "I've been stealing from my father's accounts for years, enough to start over. But I won't forget. I'll write it all down. Hide the truth so one day someone will find it. They'll silence it. Then I'll code it, hide it. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. They stayed until the fire had consumed everything, until Cypress Grove was nothing but ash and blackened wood, until no sign remained that 13 men had once gathered to commit horrors. Then they walked away in opposite directions. Catherine went north toward Charleston, then Philadelphia. Ezekiel went west toward the frontier, into places where no one asked questions. They never saw each other again. The official story was exactly as planned. A tragic accident. 13 respected men, including Silas Rutledge, perished in the cellar. A devastating loss for Colleton County. Public funerals. Speeches praising their contributions. Catherine Rutledge, the mad daughter, was reported to have died as well, trapped in her room, unable to escape. No one questioned anything. The enslaved people who took part said nothing. Most were sold within months as Cypress Grove was dismantled. Scattered across the South, they carried their secret with them. Years passed. The ruins were cleared away. The land sold. New buildings rose where the old ones had burned. But whispers lived on. Late at night in the quarters, people spoke of the plantation where the masters burned. Of the night justice came to men who thought themselves untouchable. Of the woman and man who struck the blow. The tale changed over time, becoming legend. But the core remained. Cruelty has consequences, and power is never absolute. In 1863, Union troops occupied the land where Cypress Grove once stood. They found traces of tunnels, bones in the swamp, markings that hinted at rituals. But war moved quickly, and no one looked deeper. In 1971, during demolition work, a journal was discovered sealed inside a wall. It contained names, dates, victims, every detail. But it was written in code. Before it could be fully deciphered, it vanished from the records. Some believe it was destroyed. Others claim descendants of the Brethren families took it. A few say it still waits, hidden, for the right time. What is known is simple. 13 prominent men died in a fire in 1841. Catherine Rutledge's body was never found. An enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross was listed as sold to Alabama, but no record exists. And for years after, stories spread about a secret network helping people escape, led by a man who once faced monsters and won. Whether that was truth or hope, no one can say. But some truths don't live in records. They live in stories, in memory, in the justice people remember even when history tries to bury it. This mystery reminds us, power built on cruelty is fragile. Secrets kept in darkness eventually find the light. And those deemed powerless often carry the greatest power of all, the power of witness, of memory, of refusing to forget. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Do you think the journal is still out there waiting to be found? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe to Zero Trace, hit the notification bell, and share this story with others who love the places where history and horror meet. Some stories demand to be remembered. Some voices refuse to be silenced.